Hello. Today I'll be talking about a game that I received from my Secret Santa this year, my Board Game Geek Secret Santa, and that is Undaunted Normandy. So let's go ahead and get started with how to set up and how to play. So the first thing you'll do is choose a scenario. There's a scenario book here. Gives you a little bit information about the scenarios and how to set up in the scenario. And the rules say to play the scenario 1 La Ray first. So that's how we're going to set up. So the first thing you'll do is set up your map tiles. You'll find the tiles and they're labeled with these numbers and letters, and set the map up. So let me get that done. So just looking at these tiles, they're double-sided. One side is like 1A and one side is 1B. So that's how they all are. They're double-sided. They have an A and a B side. But I have set up the map according to the image in the setup for scenario 1. Now, some of my tiles came damaged. I don't know if, hopefully that's not a common thing. There's only one that looks damaged in this setup, but I did have several that had, oh yeah, this one. So hopefully that's not common for this game. Anyway, set up the map according to the image. You then look at the scenario image and look at these objective markers and place corresponding objective markers on the map you set up. So like there's a 1, there's a 2 value goes down here. So let me get all those placed on the map. Alright, so I've got objective markers placed on the map according to how it's shown on the image for the scenario. If you were playing scenario 10, you would place this radio marker, but we're not playing scenario 10, so this will not be used. Both players will then choose a side, either US or German, and take all the cards, combat counters, control markers, and spawn markers for their side. And here are those same components for the German side. You then look at the scenario and look where the combat counters, control markers, and spawn markers go for each side on the map, and place those. So for instance, on this tile here, 17B, the US side will place a Rifleman B, Scout B, Rifleman A, Scouts A scouted control marker, and an all spawn marker. Then a scouted marker there. So the Germans would place these markers here. So I'm going to go ahead and get that set up on the map. Alright, so as you can see, I've copied the map where the control markers and combat counters for the US and German side. You then take the double-sided initiative marker and give that to who has the starting initiative according to the scenario. And in scenario 1, starting initiative is US, so they'll take the initiative marker and put that in their area. Each side will then look at the scenario and get their starting card, so they'll take each card that starts with a D, and that will form their deck. So for instance, 1 platoon sergeant for the US. So they would go through their deck of cards, find the platoon sergeant. Then they also need a squad leader A. So they would go through their deck and find squad leader A and add that to their deck. Then a squad leader B. So they go through their deck and look for B squad leader. Again, add that to their deck. Next would be 1 Rifleman A and 1 Rifleman B. So you find a Rifleman A and a Rifleman B and add those to your deck. Then you need a Scout A and a Scout B. Again, remember we're just looking at the ones with a D. So a Scout A and a Scout B. So here I've got a Scout A and Scout B, and I'll add those to my deck. And next we need 2 Fog of War cards. So I found 2 Fog of War cards, add those to my deck, and that is all that have the letter D. So that will form your starting deck. You'll take that deck, shuffle it up, and put it face down, and that'll be your starting deck. So let me do that same thing for the German side. For example, they'll need a platoon sergeant, squad leader A, squad leader B, rifleman A, rifleman B, scout A, scout B, and 2 Fogs of War as well. So let me find those cards in the German deck and get that set up. Alright, so I found all those cards for the German side, and I'll shuffle that up and put that face down, and that will form their starting deck. Alright, next each side will look at the cards that have an S, and that will form their supply. So for instance, the US needs has 4 S's for Rifleman A, so they'll find 4 Rifleman A's. Like so, 4 Rifleman A cards. And then they'll just put those face up in their play area, forming part of their supply. So next we need 4 Rifleman B. Alright, so I got my 4 Rifleman B in my supply. Then it looks like we got 2 S's for Scout A and 2 S's for Scout B. So 2 Scout A's in the supply and 2 Scout B's in the supply. Alright, so I've added 2 Scout A's to my supply, 2 Scout B. And finally, we need 5, 6, 7, 8 Fog of Wars in the supply. Alright, so I've added 8 Fog of War cards in my supply. So there's the US supply side, Rifleman A and B, Scout A and B, and some Fog of War. And that's it. So any other cards not used in the starting card setup, the rest of that deck can just be put back in the box. It won't be used in this scenario. So let me get the supply set up for the German side as well. So in this scenario, the setups are pretty much identical. 4 Rifleman A's, 4 Rifleman B's in the supply, 2 Scout A's, 2 Scout B's in the supply, and 8 Fogs of War in the supply. So I've got that set up for the German side as well. So there's their starting deck, and there's their supply. And that completes setup for this scenario. We've got the map set up, we've got the US's deck of cards, components, and their supply, and the Germans' deck, their supply, and their components. So we're all set up. Let's get on with how to play. Alright, so the game is played over several phases. The first phase is draw cards phase, which each side will draw 4 cards into their hand. So, of course, these would be in your hand, hidden from your opponent, but since I'm doing this solo, I'm just making my hand visible here. Alright, the next phase after you've drawn cards is the determine initiative phase. So both players will select one of their cards. This is the initiative value of the card. So both players will select one of their cards, reveal them simultaneously, and the player who played the highest initiative value will take initiative for the round, and they'll get to play their cards first. Now, the bad thing, the card that you choose to play to determine initiative goes into your discard pile, so you won't have it available to play when we get to the play cards phase. So, for example, we'll just say, maybe the U.S. player wants to ensure, or hopes he's ensuring he's going to go first, so he's going to choose his squad leader card. Now, remember, the players will reveal these simultaneously, but he plays that one. The German player, he got kind of a bad draw of cards here because 2 of his are Fog of War, which really can't be used for anything except playing for initiative, and they only have a value of 1. So he doesn't want to, he's got a platoon sergeant, which is, very high initiative value, but since he's not going to, these cards won't do him any good, he's just going to go ahead and he'll choose to play one of his Fog of Wars for initiative. So he reveals a 1, the U.S. reveals a 7, so they go ahead and keep the initiative marker, and they'll get to play their cards first. Then those cards that were used for initiative, as I said, go into the discard pile of your deck, so those go into the discard pile. And since the U.S. player has initiative, then he gets to go first in the play cards phase, or player turns phase. And so in the player turns phase, the player who goes first will play all of his cards into his play area, taking certain actions with him, which we'll go over here in a minute. After he's played all his cards, then the player without initiative will play all of his cards, and then that will end of the round, and you'll start over with a draw cards phase. So again, the player with initiative, in this case the U.S. player, will play cards from their hand one at a time into their play area. So these are his hand. We'll say this is his play area. So as I said, a Fog of War really is good for nothing. So he's got 2 Rifleman cards, a Rifleman A and a Rifleman B. So let's look at the actions on these cards. So this Rifleman B, it's got a move 1. So he can move one of his B Rifleman counters, which he's just got 1. He can move it 1 space, 1 adjacent space or tile. Now a Rifleman can only move into a tile that's been scouted, has a scouted marker like this, or that's controlled. So if it was flipped over like this, the Rifleman could also move there. So in this case, the only scouted tiles are the one the Rifleman's currently on, Rifleman B is currently on, or this one. So he could play this card into his play area and for a move 1, and he could move his Rifleman B into here. Now he couldn't move here, or here, or here, even though those are adjacent to the tile he's on. He couldn't move to any of these 3 because it hasn't been scouted or it's not controlled. So again, it has to either have, for a Rifleman to move there, it has to have a scouted marker on it or the flipped over for the controlled marker. So he could move there. The other possible action he can take here is a control. So let's say on a previous turn he had moved here, he could play this card not for the move but for the control action, and then he could flip this scouted marker over to controlled, and he would then control that tile and score the objective points. For as long as he controls it, he would have scored 1 objective point since it has 1 there. If the enemy has a control marker there and you take the control marker action, you don't flip yours to the controlled side, you flip theirs to the scouted side. Then in a future turn, you could then flip your, if you took another control action with a Rifleman B, you could flip yours to the controlled side. All right, the final action that could be taken with this, if you played this Rifleman B card into your play area, is you could take the attack action. The number next to it is the number of dice you'll roll, so it's kind of the strength of the attack. So when you make an attack, you can attack any enemy unit on the board, and the way that works is first you'll choose a target. So say if Rifleman B is here and he says he's going to attack Scouts A here, well, first you look at the defense value of that combat counter, which is 5 on Scouts A. Then you look at the defense value of the tile, which in this case is 1, so you would add those together, 6. Then you add the range, which is 1, 2 tiles from where he's attacking, so 1, 2, so you would add that. So that'd be a total of 8, 5, 6, and 2 for the range, 8. So it's the base defense, which is on the combat counter, the cover defense, which is on the tile, and then the range. So the further away you are from a unit you're attacking, the more difficulty you'll have in hitting them. So anyway, in this case, we determine an 8, and since it's attack 1, you would roll 1 dice. Now, this little dice roller is something my daughter made for me years ago for when I'm playing army games, and it's not great for rolling dice into, but let's see, I guess that's, as you can see, I guess that's a 1, so he would not hit. If your value that you rolled is equal to or greater than the defense value of the unit you're attacking, then you would get a successful hit. Otherwise, it's a miss. If you ever roll a 0, that is always a hit, no matter what the defense value is of the unit you're attacking. If you were playing like a rifleman only has attack 1, but like a machine gunner, which there aren't any in this scenario, but if you had a machine gunner and they have an attack 2, you would roll 2 dice. It only takes one of the one of the dice to roll a successful hit. It doesn't matter how many successful hits you get, as long as you get at least one. If you get more than one, that doesn't matter. So if your attack is successful, then your opponent would have to remove a card from their hand of the unit that you were attacking. So in this case, if he was attacking Scouts A, if the opponent had a Scouts A card in their hand, which he does, he would have to remove that from the game. You just take it out of the game. He won't have it any longer. If he didn't have one in his hand, then he would look in his discard pile, and if he had one in his discard pile, then he would remove that from the game. If they don't have a card for the unit that was attacked successfully in their hand or their discard pile, then they would go through their deck and find the card and remove it from the game. And finally, if they don't have the card in their hand, discard pile, or deck, they then have to remove the combat counter from the board. So again, if it's the U.S. player's turn, he would choose, one of his cards to play into his play area. So for instance, this rifleman, and maybe he chooses the move action and moves to this location where he can move because it's scouted. He still has 2 cards in his hand. One's a Fog of War, which is no good at all. But he has another one, a Rifleman A, which again, he could either do a move or attack or a control. The only place he could move is here where this other rifleman is, so maybe he doesn't want to do that. So maybe he decides to make an attack instead. Or he could do a control and flip this marker over to the controlled side. But there's no objective points there, so that really doesn't give him any value. So maybe he would want to make attack with that card. Then there's nothing he can do with this Fog of War card. So once he's finished playing all his cards into his play area, he gathers them up, puts them in his discard pile, and then the other player can play his cards from his hand. So let's look at some of the actions he could play. If he played this platoon sergeant, he can do a bolster 3 or a command 2. And the bolster 3 means he could take 3 cards from his supply, any 3 cards he wishes, and add them into his discard pile. If it's specified, like if it said 3A, then he would have to take 3A cards, either riflemen or scouts or a combination of the 2, and add those into his discard pile. But in this case, it doesn't specify a squad, A or B, so he could just take any 3 cards from his supply and add them into his discard pile. Or he could do the command 2. When you do the command action, you can draw the number of cards specified, so in this case 2. He could draw 2 cards from his deck into his hand and play those this turn just as if they were in his hand at the beginning after he had drawn his cards. If your deck ever runs out, like if he had to draw 2 cards but there was only 1 there to draw, then you would shuffle your discard pile. You wouldn't shuffle cards that you've played into your play area because they are not in your discard pile yet. So you would shuffle, you would draw what you can, then shuffle up your discard pile to form a new deck, and then draw whatever other cards remaining. So in this case, if he only had one card in his deck and he had a command 2, he would draw the one into his hand, then shuffle his discard pile and draw the remaining card into his hand. So, in this case, let's say maybe he does the command 2, so he would draw 2 cards into his hand, and he would have those available to play. So next, let's say he plays a scout. Let's look at the possible actions the scout has. Scout has the scout 2 action, which would allow him to move a scout A, which he has right here, up to 2, since it has 2, up to 2 tiles away, and he can move into tiles that don't have scouted markers, and for each tile he moves into that doesn't already have one, he places one of his scouted markers there. So let's say he moves there and there, so he would place a scouted marker in each one. Then his riflemen later, if you play a rifleman, they will be able to move into those spaces. But for each scouted marker you place, you have to take a fog of war card from your supply and add it into your discard pile. So in this case, if he moved his scout A2 and placed 2 scouted markers, he would have to place 2 fog of war cards into his discard pile. Okay, another action that the scout could take, if he played this card and chose not to do the scout 2 action, he could do the recon action. The recon action allows you to take a fog of war card from your hand, from cards in your hand if you have one, and remove it from the game. It just goes out of the game. Then you get to draw another card from your deck into your hand, and you'll be able to play it this turn. And again, if you went to draw that card and your deck was empty, then you would shuffle your discard pile. Again, not cards that are in your play area, but your discard pile to form a new deck and then draw that card. Another action he could take is the attack 1. We've already talked about the attack action. He would get to roll 1 dice. He could choose any enemy combat counter on the board to attack, and he would add up the base defense value. If he was attacking one in here, the base defense value plus the cover value plus the range, and then he would have to roll a dice and get a value equal to or greater than that defense value to get a hit. We've spoken about the attack action already. So finally, the other last action that he could take with the scout is the conceal action. And with that action, you force your opponent to take one of their fog of war cards and add it to their discard pile. If they don't have any fog of war cards left in their supply, then doing that action would have no effect. Just like the recon action, which allows you to remove a fog of war card from your hand out of the game, if you don't have any fog of war cards in your hand, you can't take the recon action. Alright, so he still has 3 cards in his hand. So for instance, maybe he might want to play his rifleman card into his play area, rifleman B, and do a well, we've already talked about all the actions there, but maybe he wants to do a move action, so he can move here because it's scouted. Then he has this squad leader card that he could play. Has the bolster 2A action, which we've talked about the bolster on the platoon sergeant. But this one is different because it specifies a squad. So remember, the bolster action lets you take 2 cards from your supply and add them to your discard pile, whereas the squad leader has got the bolster 2A. The platoon sergeant just had bolster 3, so you could take any 3 cards. But the squad leader, when he plays that, it specifies 2 cards, and they have to be from squad A. So he would have to take like 2 riflemen or 2 scouts or a rifleman and a scout and put them in his discard pile. So that's a little bit different between those 2 bolster actions. Then the new action we haven't talked about, so he could either do the bolster action or the inspire action. So the Inspire 1 lets you do one card, and the A specifies it has to be a card from squad A. But what that does is lets you take one card from your play area, so one of the cards you've played this round, and return it to your hand so it could be played again. Now this one, he can do one card and it has to be from squad A, so he's only got one squad A card there. So if he played this and took the Inspire action, he could take this Scout card back into his hand, and then he'll be able to play that again this turn. So now he could play that again back into his play area and do one of those available Scout actions. And then finally he has this Fog of War card, which doesn't do anything. So now he's played all his cards. He would collect and put them into his discard pile, and that would end the round. One other thing, which I didn't mention that you can do with a card, instead of playing the card for its action, you can do what's called hunkering down with that card, and that when you hunker down, you just return that card to your supply instead of putting it in your play area and taking an action with it. However, you can't hunker down a Fog of War card, so you can't hunker down a Fog of War card and return it to supply. But any of your other cards, you can do the hunker down action and return them to your supply. So again, that would end the round. We would then start a new round where both players would draw 4 cards into their hand. And again, if your deck is empty or empties while you're drawing your 4 cards, you would shuffle your discard pile and draw whatever remaining cards you still need to draw until you have 4, and then we'd move on to the determine initiative step and so on until you keep playing that way until you meet the victory condition for the scenario you're playing. For scenario 1, the victory condition for both sides is the same: control 5 objective points. So the Germans start out already controlling 3 objective points. They've got a 3 there, so they just need to grab and control one of these others, either 2 1-value objective points or one of these 2-value objective points. As soon as the condition is met, then that player wins. And remember, having a scouted token on an objective point tile does not mean you control it. You actually have to take a control action where you have a scouted token and flip it to its control side. And again, if as mentioned previously, if the opponent has a control marker there and you take the control action, you can't flip yours also, but you flip theirs back to the scouted side. And you can never, if an enemy control marker is in a space and you take the control action, you can't flip it to the controlled side. So you'd have to wait until you've removed that enemy, or he's moved off on his own. But as soon as one side meets the victory conditions, then they win. There are some other victory conditions. For instance, scenario 2, the U.S. wins if they control one objective point, but the Germans win if they pin the U.S. forces. And pinning the U.S. forces happens, as it says here, if the U.S. forces have no more riflemen combat counters on the board, then that counts as them being pinned, and the German player would win. Let's touch on a few other actions and things we haven't talked about. If you ever play a card from your hand into your play area, for instance, this Rifleman B, and you have no Rifleman B token combat counter on the board, you would immediately place one in the spawn area. Remember, these are the spawn tokens. In this scenario, all your spawn, all the tokens that you spawn would spawn in this location, or for the US this location. So you would immediately place it there in the spawn area and then take an action with it. In other scenarios, you may have a spawn token where you can only spawn squad B. Like if that was placed there, any of your squad B units would spawn there, and maybe if you had this spawn token here. Any of your squad C spawn tokens would spawn there, etc. But in this scenario, you have the all token, which means all your tokens would spawn here for the Germans and all for up here for the Americans, the U.S. We'll talk about a few actions that are from units that weren't in the first scenario. So the machine gunner, we've talked about move and attack. Again, he would get to attack with 2, but the machine gunner also has suppress, and he gets to roll 4 dice, and that works very similar to the regular attack action, except for if you're successful, if you take the suppress action, it works just like the attack. You add the unit that you're trying to suppress, you add their base defense value plus the tiles cover bonus plus the range. But again, here you get to roll 4 dice. If any of those are successful in the attack, equaling the defense value or greater, then you don't inflict any casualty on that unit, but you do suppress that unit. So, for instance, if he was attacking Scouts A and he was successful, you would just flip it to its suppressed side where it's got those green lines through it. And then next time that the opponent would play a card for Scouts A or for whatever the suppressed unit is, instead of actually being able to take an action with that unit, they just flip it back over to its unsuppressed side. Another action we haven't seen is the guide action. That just lets you, if you play that card and take that action, you can move any combat counter that number of spaces. So guide 1, you can move any of your combat counters on the board 1 tile, but again, they have to move onto a scouted or controlled tile, and you can't move a suppressed counter. And if you move a mortar counter, which we haven't talked about yet, but if you move a mortar, they have to remove their target marker. We'll talk about that here in a second. So let's look at the mortar. They have the move action, which that works just like any other move action. You would, if your mortar team was on the board, you can move them. If you played a move 1, they can move 1 tile. Again, it would have to be to a scouted or controlled tile. If you move the mortar team, or then you must pick up your target marker, which here's the target marker, by the way, and we'll talk about the target marker now. So if you played this card and took the target action, you get to place the target marker on any space up to 3 tiles away. So 1, 2, 3, you could put it there if your mortar team was here. 1, 2, 3. Actually, it can be 3 or more tiles away. It just can't be less than 3 tiles. If your target marker is already on the board, you can still take the target action and move it, and again the same, up to 3 or more tiles away. And finally, if you take the blast action, then that's similar to the attack action. So you would, but like a blast 1, you would get to roll 1 combat dice, and you would attack each counter in the same tile as your target marker. And it works the same as the other regular attack action again, except for you would attack each individual combat counter on that tile, even your own, if some of your own combat counters were on that tile. And it works the same. You add up their base defense plus the cover bonus of the tile. Now, there is no range when you're doing a blast attack. Range does not, so they don't get a bonus defense for range, so it's just the base defense plus the cover of the tile. And then you roll a die and see if you get equal to or greater than their defense value, and you do that for each individual counter on the board. And if you're successful, then you do what we talked about before in the attack action, where they have to remove a card of that type of unit from their hand. If they don't have it in the hand, then from the discard pile. If they don't have it in the discard pile, then from their deck. And if they don't have it then they in their deck, then they remove the counter from the board. And I think the only remaining action we haven't talked about is if you are playing a scenario that has a sniper and you play your sniper card. It has the stalk action. So stock 1 lets you move your snipers 1 tile, and it doesn't have to be one that has previously been scouted or controlled. So you can just move 1 tile with a stock 1. You can just move 1 tile to 1 adjacent tile, and again, it doesn't have to be scouted or controlled. And I think that pretty much covers all the possible actions for all the different unit types that could be in a scenario. So I'm going to reset scenario 1, redo my decks, draw 4 cards, and we'll start and go through an example round or 2. Alright, I think I got everything set back up how it should be at the start of the game. Done the draw cards phase, so the US and German player both drawn 4 cards into their hand. Remember, the winner is whoever gets 5 objective points, controls 5 objective points. First thing we have to do is determine initiative. So we'll say the US player, he's going to bid with his squad leader, and the German player, he's going to bid with his platoon sergeant. So they both reveal simultaneously. Platoon sergeant has an initiative value of 9 against squad leader of 7. So German player gets initiative. He'll take the initiative marker. These cards that were played for initiative go into the discard pile. So the German player's first. He'll play squad leader B. He'll do bolster 2B, so he gets to draw 2 B squad cards and put them into his discard pile. So he'll do 1 rifleman and 1 scout. Alright, then he'll play squad leader A, and he'll do the same thing, but he'll take a rifleman A. So he's going to do the bolster 2A, so he's going to take a rifleman A and a scout A and put those into his discard pile. His last card is just a fog of war, so that's worthless. So now he discards all the cards from his play area into his discard pile. Alright, it's the US player's turn. This is a hand he has. He's going to play his scout A, and he's going to do a scout 2. So he finds his scout A, and he's going to do 1 and 2. So he gets to put 2 scouted markers, 1 in each of those, but that does mean he's got to draw 2 fat fog of war cards and put those into his discard pile. Alright, then he's going to play a rifleman A into his play area, and he'll do a move. So he's going to move rifleman A here. He can do that because it's scouted now. Now he still doesn't control this, so he doesn't have those 2 objective points yet. And lastly, he has a fog of war card, which is no good, so he puts that and he's done. Alright, so that's going to end the round. Each player will now draw 4 cards into their hand. Alright, so this is their hand of cards. They have to choose one to play for initiative. The American player, the US player, he's going to choose that one. And the German player, he's going to play that. So they both reveal. He's got an initiative value of 9, so the US player gets the initiative. They'll get to go first. Both of these cards get discarded. Alright, so the US player now gets to play his 3 cards. We'll just say he plays his Scout B to do recon. recon action, so that lets him remove a Fog of War card from his hand from out of the game. And then he gets to draw a new card into his hand. And so he'll go ahead and play that new card, Rifleman B. And he will do a move with that one. So he's going to move this Rifleman B. He can't move there. He can move here because it's scouted. And then he will play his squad leader and do Inspire 1B. And that lets him choose one B card from his play area. He'll choose the Rifleman, put that back into his hand, and now he'll play that, and he'll take the control action. So he will take the control action with Rifleman B, and he can flip this over, and now he has one objective point. That's all the cards in his hand, so he'll discard those, and you can see when he has to draw cards at the beginning of the round, he'll have to shuffle up his discard pile. But now it's the German player's turn, so let's see what he's got. He's going to do a Scout 2. He's going to play Scout B and do Scout 2. So he finds a Scout B, and he's going to go 1, 2, so he gets to place scouted markers on both of those. But because he placed 2, he's going to take 2 Fog of War cards from his supply and put them in his discard pile. He'll play Rifleman A to move, and he will move Rifleman A here, and he can do that because it's scouted. And finally, his Fog of War card is of no value, so he just discards. Alright, in the round, we'll do one more example round. Alright, so now both players have to draw up to 4. He has 1 card, so he can draw 1 card in his hand, then he's going to have to shuffle and draw 3 more. He's got to shuffle his and draw all 4. Alright, they've shuffled their decks, they've drawn up to their hand of 4 cards, they got to play for initiative. He doesn't have anything, he's got 2 Fog of War cards, so he doesn't want to waste those, so he's going to pick a Fog of War card. This guy, we'll say he picks a Rifleman. Alright, so they reveal he's got initiative value of 1, he's got initial value of 5. These goes in our discard pile, and the Germans get the initiative, so they get to play first. So he's got 2 Fog of War, so the only thing he can really play is his Rifleman B. So just so we can show an attack, we'll say he's going to make an attack with Rifleman B. So Rifleman B is here, he's going to attack this Rifleman here. So he's got a base defense of 4, a cover bonus from the tile of 1, so that's 5, and the range is 1, 2, so that's 7. So he's got an attack 1, so he rolls 1 dice, he needs a 7 or better to be successful. He got a 5, so it's a miss, he's not successful. He's only got 2 Fog of War cards, so he plays those, and now he's done, and his cards go from his play area to his discard pile. So now the US player gets to go. He's going to do we'll say he's going to play Scout B. So he'll do Scout 2, and we'll just say he's just going to move 1 in here, and he gets to put one of his scouted markers in there. And since he's only moved 1, you can move up to 2, but he's only going to move 1. Since he put 1, he's got to put a Fog of War card. So he's played that. Now he's going to do, he's going to play a squad leader to Inspire 1B, so he'll take his scout card back with that Inspire action since it's a B, and now he's going to play that again as an attack 1, and he's going to attack this scouts. So 5 of base defense, 2 for the cover, so a total of 7, but the ranges, so they're in the same place, so no range bonus, so he's got to get a 7 or better. He does, he gets a 9. So he's successful, so the player would have to remove a Scout B from his hand. Well, he's got no cards in his hand, So then he's got to look at his discard pile and look for a Scout B. There's not one in there. So then he's got to look through his deck and find a Scout B. Okay, I found one, so that is just removed from the game. Now he shuffles up his deck cards again and puts them back. Alright, so I've shuffled the deck and put it back. You don't shuffle your discard pile in at that time. And then his last card is a Fog of War card, so that's it, and that would end the round. So I think you can see how the game plays. I think it's, at least I've only played 2 scenarios, this first scenario and the next scenario. Both of them played pretty quickly. And even playing solo like this, I think it's pretty fun. So I haven't played it with another real opponent yet, but I think that would make it even funner. So I like this game. It's fun. Seems to be pretty quick, at least from the couple of times that I've played it. And there seems to be some good strategy to it. So I like it. I have fun with it. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.